Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. I'm Hugh Morris, a Senior Research Partner with Zien. I'm absolutely delighted to chair today's webinar, T+1 from Intent to Action. T+1 is going to bring profound changes to the UK settlement landscape, and it's scheduled for the back end of 2027. And the latest development would appear to be that Europe is aligned for the same timeframe. So this is going to be an enormous subject over the next couple of years. Now, I'm delighted to be joined today by two true experts in this, in Andrew Douglas and Ian Perham. Andrew spent 35 years in the city working in the post-trade space at Citibank, Deutsche and Swift. After 13 years at the DTCC, he left in 2023 to start his own advisory business, Blackwater Consultancy. Until March of this year, when his 3-year term expired, Andrew was chair of the Data Standards Committee for the Bank of England's Transforming Data Collection Initiative. Today, critically, Andrew is chair of the UK Accelerated Settlement Task Force, leading the planning of the UK migration to T+1 in 2027. He's also a non-executive director for 2 financial fintech companies and a senior advisor for APCO Worldwide Financial Services with clients both in Brussels and London. Andrew is joined by Ian Perham, and Ian is a senior securities industry practitioner with a 30-plus year track record of managing and supporting successful delivery across the financial services industry, including exchanges, fund managers, wealth managers, investment banks, brokers, custodians, CSD, banks, etc. Ian works at Tory Global, and he draws on lots of aspects of his experience, including a very detailed understanding of front-to-back processes for both buy and sell-side firms. He's very experienced in risk management processes, common data and its challenges, reconciliations and issues that cause fails, as well as how to implement meaningful controls and ways to minimize system implementation, cost, risk, and complexity. Gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. It's deeply useful to everyone listening that we have such great experts. So it's now my duty to get out of the way as fast as possible, and I will conduct a conversation with Andrew and with Ian to introduce the subject, and then after we've been through a series of discussion notes, then at about 25 past, we will hand over to the audience for question and answer. Please do fill in questions in the questions tab, and I will be delighted to relay them to Andrew and to Ian. So without more ado, let's crack on. Andrew, perhaps you could set the scene for us in terms of where we are with regulators, where we are in the UK, latest developments in Europe. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks, Hugh. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for not once referring to me as an industry veteran, which is always very much appreciated. Where are we? We are at an interesting point, I guess, for the project. For those of you that are not familiar with the sort of backstory, this project kicked off in 2023 as part of a response to the so-called Edinburgh Reform speech that the then Chancellor Jeremy Hunt made in, I think it was November 22. One of the recommendations there was that the UK should look at whether it implemented T+1. And my colleague and great friend Charlie Geffin was appointed to be the chair of the Accelerated Settlement Task Force, looking at answering the question, is it if or is it when? And he published his report in March of this year, which said very firmly it was when, not if. And this report was accepted fully by the government, and we moved into what you might call the second phase, which I'm now chairing, which is called the Accelerated Settlement Task Force Technical Group. And what we're doing is looking at the actual plan. What do we need to do in order to adopt T+1 in the UK? We published a draft report at the end of September, which contained around 60 recommendations that the task the task force had identified during the work that we'd conducted in 2024. We put those out for consultation to the industry for 1 month. I received about 30 responses, which varied from small individual firms and firms that were overseas, which was very gratifying, through to most of the large industry associations. So we got a good response, I feel, in terms of sanity checking the recommendations that we were making. And pleasingly, none of the response indicated that we'd made any errors in our assessment of what needed to be done. And so we are now in the final throes of pulling together a report which will be finished and published sometime in January, subject to the various governmental approvals, because government has to see the report before it goes, before it is made public. So I'm in the process of writing that report. In fact, as long as Ian promises not to look, I have a copy of the latest draft in front of me, which I circulated to the task force yesterday with a view to discussing that tomorrow at our weekly task force meeting. One of the things that we've been keen to do all along is to make sure that this is a collegiate approach, if you like, to coming up with the solution. So this is not me sitting in my office and deciding what the industry is going to do. The recommendations and the final rules and principles that we will publish, they have been drafted as a result of I have a list of 450 plus individuals from, I think, 116 city firms who have all at some point in the last 12 months played a role in those discussions about what it is UK market participants, whether they're in the UK or whether they're outside of the UK, what do they actually need to ensure that we can implement T+1 settlement here in the UK in 2027. And I'm sure many of you, if you're interested in this topic, which I'm assuming that it's the reason that you've joined us today, will be aware that ESMA produced a report, was published a week ago today, which basically set out the European approach, which pleasingly from my perspective, although not surprisingly, because we've had a lot of interplay with the European community during the last 12 months. The ESMA report is very similar in its recommendations to the recommendations that we're making, and is in fact identical when it comes to the date. So that was very pleasing for us that we have, because it was very much one of our primary goals from an operational perspective. Having a single migration event in 2027 is a much more desirable solution than having a UK event followed by a European event followed by a Swiss event. So it looks like we're all in a good place at the moment, with the UK and the EU being aligned about what needs to be done and when it needs to be done by. One of the questions I frequently get asked is, so what's the support from the UK regulatory community for this initiative? Clearly, it comes from the very highest level, in the sense that government is so far supportive, and I hope will remain supportive when they see the detail of our final implementation report. The single piece of regulation that we are recommending gets changed is CSDR section 5.2, I think it is, which will be amended to reflect that the UK will settle on a T+1 regime from October 2027. And we have worked very closely the meeting that I referred to tomorrow, the project meeting that occurs every Tuesday, and we have HMT, FCA and the bank as observers to that meeting, and they have been observers from day one. And they're not really observers because they can be quite vocal. So they see all the drafts of what we're producing. There is a section in the draft report which talks specifically about regulatory support, and we are in the process of finalising agreement with the FCA and the bank as to what that regulatory support will look like. But at the moment, we appear to have all our ducks in a row, whether that's from the industry, which is 100% behind this project and the date and the recommendations, and from the regulators who are also up to speed on that. So that in sort of background, that's where we are now. I think we're in a very positive place. We have a reasonable time frame ahead of us, and I know Ian and I are going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but we have a very reasonable time frame in which people can get the work done that needs to be done to make the work that I want people to associate with this project when we go live is flawless. I want us to migrate to T+1 in a way which is flawless, seamless. When we go live, first day, 11th of October 2027, T+1, there will be no issues. And in an ideal world, what I would like, I know I've mentioned this statistic to Ian before, but for the benefit of the folks who've dialed in, who may not be aware of this, today, 5% of trades through Crest, UK trades through Crest, settle on a T+1 settlement cycle. And my goal is in the next two and 3/4 years that we actually get that figure up to something more. I mean, 5% is tangible, but something even bigger than that. So actually migration becomes a non-event because the majority of trades are already settling on a T+1 basis.
Now, the US has sort of been down this road ahead of us, and we're starting to get some experience coming out of the US. What are perhaps the lessons learned from the US?
So we actually, within the structure of the task force, the technical group of the task force, we actually had an entire work stream devoted to lessons learned from other jurisdictions. It's principally North America, so the US, Canada, Mexico, etc. And I would say that two lessons spring immediately to mind. The first is regulatory support is necessary to make this happen, which is why we've been focused on developing a plan with the UK regulators to achieve that. And the second one is very simple. It's automation. The move to T+1, it sounds like you're losing 50% of the time available. In actual fact, Sol's far cleverer than I when it comes to maths, worked out that when you look at actual working hours in the period, you lose 83% of the time that you currently have available for fixing problems that manifest after the trade is struck. So this is just not possible by well, let me take that back. I was going to say it's not possible by throwing people at it. Of course, it is possible by throwing people at it, but then you end up in a situation where we now have anecdotal evidence from the US experience that there is a whole bunch of people out there now saying, why are my staffing bills so high post T+1? And the answer is very simple. They threw bodies at it rather than automating. And automating is definitely the preferred solution. And as I said, we've got 2 3/4 years to do this. I would like to see 2025 as the year people plan, 2026 as the year people automate, and 2027 as the year people test and go live. Just to give you an idea of the figures that I'm talking about, I am privy to some confidential research, but this research suggests that staffing bills have increased by 16 to 18% for some firms in the US, and none of us want to be in that position in 2027. Again, sort of surprising statistics that I've become aware of during the course of this project. In the US, 3 months before US go live, 30% of the asset management industry had done nothing to prepare, nothing at all to prepare for the implementation of T+1. And for those that had started projects around automation, 75% of those projects had a deadline for go live after the US deadline for T+1. So not really very helpful in getting you over the line for T+1. So as I said, I'm sure we'll talk about this more. My message, and those of you that hear me speak at other events will be able to verify, one of the things that I talk about all the time is automation, and don't wait until 2027 to kick these things off. 5% of trades today settle T+1. You can do it today, so why not?
Now, Ian, I know you've been thinking about the implications of what Andrew's been talking about in terms of the planning, the need for automation, and that you're very much of the view that this is a substantial endeavour and that people really need to focus. Lucas, if we could have the slide, please, for Ian to share his thoughts.
So, thanks, Hugh. So the slide that's just gone up is a schematic, really, that I'm going to talk around, and it's really on boxes on the right summarize a lot of the things that are in the ESMA and the Accelerated Settlement Task Force activities that are needed prior to go live. And really what I'm hoping to do is share information about the boxes on the left here today, and to reinforce Andrew's point about the need to start preparing now. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that it's wrong to think of this as being back office. It isn't. It is front office, that there are big potential cost, service and reputational impacts at firm level. And Andrew, actually, I know one of the things that you have spoken about is the implications potentially for the UK and European capital markets if it doesn't go right, and the additional costs that come through with this.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been looking at, as I said, our primary goal was to align the UK and the EU migration, basically to eliminate any problems that would arise as a result of typically things like dual listed securities or ETFs, which contain baskets of cross-border securities, trying to avoid the misalignment of settlement cycles. So where you've got a basket of securities and some of them settle on T+1 and some settle on T+2, that would not be very helpful in terms of the redemption and subscription timeframes. So ESMA's announcement takes that issue off the table, which is, I think, helpful for us.
Thanks. Yeah. So, so I think this is a big program that I think actually for many firms it is going to take the 3 years to plan and deliver. I think it's fixing issues that have remained unresolved at both firm and industry level for decades. And Hugh, when you describe me as a veteran, some of the things that I look at, like the SSIs and the trade allocation timings, we've been trying to get those sorted out since the 1990s. I'd also say that firms repeatedly underestimate the complexity and time to deliver these types of program. And this includes underestimating or not understanding dependencies and the issues and complexities, because this is going to go across the organization. It's going to involve a load of multiple parties, internal and external. And as Andrew says, it's not a throw people at it late on program. The failure to put in place the building blocks and plans to support effective automation and exception management will result in poor customer service, reputational damage, and significant direct and indirect cost. However, in terms of making it something that people really want to focus on, it does have settlement in the title. It isn't going to happen until the end of 2027. And the impact of the reduction of time to process business and exceptions isn't obvious from the title. Because T+1 means same-day settlement. T+2 doesn't. T+1 does mean same-day processing. Same-day processing. It's also happening alongside development of digital asset markets. And this marketplace is going to mature in parallel over the next few years, including the regulation and legal frameworks that it needs to operate at scale. So we think that it's very important for the firms that don't already have established programs to start sizing the challenge of moving to T+1 now. And we suggest that this should include the impact on the front office and the need to be ready to minimize potential additional costs. So things like agents' fees, fines, lines of credit, interest, collateral, FX payments, things that directly impact the front office P&L. Should include a review of exceptions. How many root causes are there that need to be fixed? What's the approximate cost to deliver this? Firms need to review their current operating models in the context of the need for same-day processing. And this is outlined in both the Accelerated Settlement Task Force and the ESMA reports. And this is very broad-reaching. It needs to consider stakeholders, so it's internal and external, counterparties, clients, service providers, technology suppliers. It needs to consider data sources and owners, so core sources, exception sources that follow different processes, coming internally and from external sources. And that's across all dimensions. That's static data, trades, allocations, FX, funding, etc., plus the locations and time zones where it's coming from. It needs to consider the current timings, again, both core and exceptions. It needs to consider receipt errors and delays. What happens when don't things come in properly? How many? When does it happen during the day? How long to address them? And then having received the data, the processing errors and delays, again, the number, the timing, and again, across the time to address. Then the outputs, cause and exceptions, internal, external, where's it going? Is it going somewhere else in the organization? Is it going out to a client? What are the problems for getting that out? What's exceptional? What needs manual processing? And then once it's gone out internally or externally, again, the exceptions, how many? How long to, what time do they come in a day? How long to fix? And I think this is the information that firms need to understand their baseline costs, both in the back office and the front office. And this is to the point that's made in the US and UK and Europe. But if firms get this right, if the industry gets this right, there are potential huge cost savings across the industry because it's solving a lot of problems that just need manual intervention at the moment. So the baseline costs, what are the benefits going to be? Understanding the value of spending on automation, it's important to get that. And it's very important, and back to Andrew's point about the planning for it, to understand which processes and which areas can't just be done quicker and why. So what is on the critical path? What do you absolutely need for October 2027? What can you work around and do later? So these are the key inputs to the design of a new operating model that will minimize the impact on the front office and possibly give it new opportunities and determine the changes that are needed to the current operating model. And this is the approach that we'd recommend and which many firms are indeed taking. The changes, and looking at the slide here, we'd say the changes may be significant, the changes that are needed. So it's important to have sufficient information available in 2025 to get the business case together, to ensure the necessary funds are allocated in time to deliver the necessary changes. And talking to firms and working with firms out in the industry, some examples of the firms that are already up and running with programs are: data is going to be key. We know we have to sort this out, and we've kicked off this work stream already. So that's about making sure that all data, static data, is consistent, accurate, and received in all relevant systems on a timely basis. Next point was the eventual target model needs to support same-day settlement, including digital assets. T+1 is just an interim deliverable in a multi-year transformation program. So that's an organization that's going, the future is going to look different. We need to support digital assets. We need to be able to do things same day because probably T0 settlement is coming. Next, other feedback was the costs and risks of upgrading our legacy system may be too high. We should look at replacement options. So if we're going to run an RFP and replace a back office system, that's a major project. And similar to that, the cost of upgrading our infrastructure may be too high, and we should be looking at outsourcing options. And the flip side, there may be a business opportunity here to win new clients that will need to consider outsourcing options. So these are all things that people are working on preparing now, and I do think there'll be other vendors will see other opportunities and bring in new services. The last point I'd like to make is around the industry-wide nature of this program and the dependencies this creates. So the first thing, firms need to be confident that their counterparties and suppliers are making the same level of commitment. The marginal cost of dealing with firms that can't support automated same-day processing will be significantly higher than today. It's a figure I was given very recently, an anecdotal sort of figure was, it's about 10% of the business takes up 40% of the cost. And that's just going to get worse if people don't automate in a T1 environment. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. I think the message there is clear. Act early and make sure that you really are prepared for the automation journey. Now my pleasure to throw this open to the audience and to take questions. We've already got some great questions, but please do keep them coming. And let me start off with Dan Feeney, who's a very loyal supporter of FS Club webinars. And Dan asks, where does the move from T2+2 to T+1 fit into the UK's national payment vision? How much of the infrastructure, say RTGS, needs an upgrade led by peer UK or other body, or are there any other impacts?
Okay, I don't mind having a pop at that one. It's a good question. I know it's a good question because it's one we've been asking in the task force at a very simple level. For example, BACS is not aligned. It's not aligned today with the settlement cycle. I think BACS is 3 days and we're on 2 days. So there is a recommendation in there. We have categorized recommendations according to how critical they are to T+1. And BACS is what we've called, as an example, BACS, I'm not picking on BACS, is an example of an environmental recommendation that we're making, which is something that, and I guess this is the direct answer to the question, we have no control over it. And so we have to not have that on the critical path. Nobody feels that not having that system aligned with a T+1 cycle is going to make any have any real impact on whether we move to T+1 or not. The same arguably in the FX space, where spot is obviously a T+2 cycle, and for investors outside of the UK when we move to T+1, that will present some problems. But these, whilst we wait for those, well, we can't afford to wait for other systems. There is, Ian and I were talking about this earlier, scope creep. For those of you that are old enough to remember, there's also the Christmas tree effect, which is you put up the Christmas tree, which is T+1, and everyone starts to hang baubles, which are effectively every other problem that we've had for years, get those resolved, and you end up everything just gets too complicated and gets weighed down. So our decision has been, we know these are issues, we are highlighting them to the UK authorities as things which need to be resolved, but they are not on our critical path. We are going to go ahead without them if they're not fixed.
Thank you, Andrew. Moving on now to Anna Reitman, who says, at a recent conference, T+1 ended up being identified as the top factor that will change business practices for UK/European securities lending market participants. How do you see this particular area of the market unfolding up to implementation and beyond?
So interesting, stock lending has been, again, a specific work stream that we've had during the course of the last 12 months, because it was recognised that stock lending and repo were the two areas which facilitate trading. So they were, or facilitate settlement, should I say, and we needed to pay attention to them. So we have been supported by both ICMA and ISLA as members of the work streams. And we have had the stock lending work stream has been led by Roy Zimmerhansel. Those of you who are in the stock lending space will probably recognise the name. Roy's been around a long time. He's very experienced in this. And we have come up with a bunch of recommendations, which we are now looking at, converting into rules for the stock lending community, which will be supported by the ICMA and ISLA rule books. So if you're members of either of those two, this stuff should become very familiar. What we're looking at, the principal recommendation is to automate the recall process, which I know has been around a long time as a suggestion, but T+1 is perhaps the catalyst which will force people to finally do this. Excuse me. So, as I said, the automation of recalls will be the biggest request of the industry. The other recommendations, the other rules that we have, are really designed at putting in place the conditions which will make automation a reality. So I would recommend most of those, if not all of the recommendations / rules, are already visible. They're in the report which was published in September. So I would recommend that if people haven't seen those, they should go to the website. It's kindly hosted by KPMG. There is an Accelerated Settlement Task Force website. There is a draft. The draft of the report that was published in September is on there. All of the relevant regulations are given the notification SFT for securities finance transactions, and I think there's about half a dozen of them. So if you haven't seen those already, have a look at those. That will give you a pretty good view of where we're headed with regard to this space. One of the things one of the things just to add there is volumes of stock lending transactions have gone up quite considerably in the US post T+1. So focus on this space is particularly important, particularly relevant.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's extremely helpful. Question now perhaps for Ian. You put on your slide that this is a fairly major undertaking, and there is some time to do it, but it's a major undertaking. How would you recommend a head of IT or a head of operations or a head of front office should start tackling this? What are the first steps that people should take?
So our recommendation would be to start to size it and understand the implications across the organisation. So both the Accelerated Settlement Task Force and the ESMA reports give a lot of information about what the future world is going to need to look like. So you can make some good working assumptions about this is where we're going to need to complete these activities by. people should start collecting data in on where they're spending the money in terms of the costs, the funding costs, the agent fees and so forth, and where their exceptions are at the moment. So what is it that's going wrong as they go down? What is it they're having to fix manually? Where are the blockages? They should certainly start understanding data. I mean, it's interesting when I get involved in data projects, just how poorly documented or poorly understood data can be across organizations about who owns the system that has the core data. And if you're going to come to that person and you're going to say, in a new world, I don't want a file that comes in once a day. I want a file that comes in at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., midday. Tolerances for getting it are now down to a few minutes because I need it on time. Who is it I'm going to go to and ask to produce that? And and do they have the capacity in order to produce that information? Do they know this is coming down the line? So I think the first step is and I'm not sure I would start it in IT particularly. I think this is a business project. This is a business operating model project that IT should be kicking off, because it's about the organization. It's about what sort of organization do you want to be. And to Andrew's point about Christmas trees and scope creep, I think understanding what you're trying to achieve is important, because you do need to understand, do we think that in 5 years' time, this is going to be, the market's going to be different and we're potentially solving an interim problem for part of our business, because actually blockchain will be there for trading part of the and settlement for some of the activities that we're on. So understand what it is you're moving towards as a strategy, and then work back from that and understand where the blockages are at the moment and what's needed to address that. And that will bring up to the top, this is where we're spending our money, this is where the blockages are, these are the things which are fine, these are the things which we are okay with, but we're doing them in a part of the world where maybe from a risk point of view we're not comfortable that they're happening at 3 o'clock in the morning in that part of the world. We rather that they move back to a more local time zone with more supervision.
And if I can just interrupt there, one of the things I like about what Ian has just said is I banged on a lot about automation. There is plenty of stuff in the requirements that is not automation. It's behavioral change. These are things that you could do today. So, for example, the use of partial settlements. It's possible today, but people don't do it. I don't know why they don't do it, but you can do that without having to go through an automation process. It's looking at your business processes and working out where you need to tweak them. So what I would see firms doing is that kind of twin track approach. What are the behavioral things we need to do, and what are the system things we need to do, and then break it down into nice bite-sized pieces that can be executed over the next 2 and 3/4 years, rather than leaving it all, as I said, I will be a broken record on this, not waiting until the middle of 2027 and then saying, well, we have to do things now. It'll be too late.
And yes, and that's, I suppose what I'm saying is that the period now through next year should be about collecting forming the vision, what sort of organization do we want to be. And it may be for some organizations, they will actually go, you know what, it is just behavioral change. The nature of our business means that we've done our assessment, and really we just need to make sure that we've done certain things by the certain cut-off points at the time of day, and somebody needs to be here until whenever to make sure it's all done. But we doesn't need much technology. Our providers can support that. Or it may be much, much broader. But I do think the next few months need to be organizations understanding the scale of this and defining where it is they want to get to, and understanding what the business case will be for that, and going to the board and having those conversations next year so that they've got 2 years to actually build and implement this. Because, as I said in the example, some of the things that are coming up are major. If organizations need to sort their data out, if organizations think they need to replace a back office system, those are big projects.
Super, thank you. I'll just interrupt with a brief contribution from Nathan Cropper, who says, no question, but just please share my thanks to Andrew and Ian, truly enlightening. So that's great. I think we've time for one more question, which I will pose to both of you. What do you see as the potential gotchas that could impact this? Because clearly huge amounts of industry engagement has occurred, thought has been applied, and tremendous detail and a really great understanding of the nature of the change required as well as the journey. What perhaps could derail it that we should all be wary of and guard against?
Yeah, be my guess.
So I would say there is a bit of a slight danger of wishful thinking that this is a good thing, and obviously there's lots of people involved, and they talk to the other people who are involved. But having seen various changes and hoped that they were going to be the catalyst to lead to the resolution of all these changes over the years, and that would be reductions in settlement cycles or settlement discipline with CSDR. And I would say that there are organizations which have quite successfully not done anything about those. And I think one of the gotchas is about, as this does require everybody to get involved, is if organizations take the view that they don't need to do anything because they never have before, which I think is wrong.
I mean, for me, there is only one gotcha. There are none around the project. The project will go ahead. The project will pass into law in the UK, and the UK will migrate in October 2027 to a T+1 environment. The only issue is, are you on the bus or are you running after the bus? And it comes back to everything we've said, that Ian has said, that I've said before. I've been involved in these sort of initiatives. The first one I got involved with, and I'm sure there are people on the call who will remember this, the Giovannini barriers. First report in 2001, second report in 2003. There was then the post-trade forum, which was 2017, I think. That was sponsored by the European Commission. There was a couple of things in between that. Here in the UK, we had an initiative sponsored by the bank, which came out with what I think is called the Hudson Report, after the chairman, Dave Hudson. And all of these suffered from the same issue, which was there was no regulatory imperative to make the change. There was nothing. If you didn't do any of this stuff, things didn't get bad. This settlement cycle will change in October 2027. That is a given. And if you're not ready to be able to exploit that, the industry isn't going to wait for you. And so it's about automation and behavioral change and doing it now, not waiting till the last minute and thinking, maybe this won't happen, maybe this won't impact me, maybe I'll be able to model my way through it. None of those are true. And one of the things that I hope we will see as a result of this, you'd be very familiar, it's a very hackneyed expression, but a rising tide lifts all boats. What we are trying to do here is to make the back office for UK securities industry the most efficient back office there is. And that will help everybody. The people it will help everybody who gets with the program. It won't help the people who aren't ready for it. So my advice is to avoid that gotcha. Get on with it.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much, Ian. It's now drawing our session to a close. Sadly, we are rapidly running out of time, but there is time to do thanks. First of all, absolutely massive thanks to our sponsors, without whom we would not be able to conduct this series of webinars. We hugely appreciate your support. And a big thank you to our audience for joining us today. And if you've enjoyed today, there are some events coming up tomorrow and next week. Launch of the Smart Centres Index 10 tomorrow, There's a Christmas-themed walk and drinks for those of you able to be in London next Tuesday the 3rd. And then after that, on the 9th of January, there's an update on EU financial services legislation and associated initiatives. It just remains for me to offer my profound thanks to Ian and to Andrew for a tremendous and extremely valuable session today. And I wish everybody a good rest of the day, afternoon or evening, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you and goodbye.